OCAN monthly meeting. The focus tonight is on climate action in Oregon, and we're going to look at legislative and executive order 2004 updates. Jeff Golden will be joining us shortly. Pam Marsh, unfortunately, is probably not going to be able to join us because they are scheduled to work in the evenings right now. And then Alan will take care of the parts on the executive order and also cover what's happening in the House. So quickly, a few Zoom tips. If you're not muted already, would you please mute yourself? And we take care of questions through the chat. So the chat should be at the bottom of your screen. If you click on that, you should get a window. If you have a question, then please type it into the chat. And as we have breaks, Lori Kaplan is going to read the questions that are in the chat to our speakers. If you're not happy with the way you see things right now, if you go to screen options in the upper right-hand corner, you can either select side-by-side or side-by-side speaker, or side-by-side gallery, and that may be marked view in the upper right corner. And the presentation is being recorded this evening. What we like to do is have actions that people can take. And so at the end of the session, I will share the webpage that we have identified. It's socan.eco/action, and then there are actions specific to tonight's discussion that you can take. Lori, I'm checking. Is Jeff here yet?
Don't see him.
I don't see him.
Thank you.
I'll keep checking the list, Kathy.
Okay.
I guess we gotta just go forward with the House, and I'll come back to Jeff when he gets here.
Okay, I think what we'll do is our plan is to talk about the Senate and current actions, and then the House, and then the executive order. And what we do is we finish with SOCAN activities so that you know the kinds of things that are going on with SOCAN.
Come in.
Okay. So we'll wait just a second. And Jeff Golden is senator for many of us. He represents Senate District 3, and we are very, very fortunate to have Jeff as our senator. Jeff, I will stop sharing if you're ready to start talking about what's happening in the Senate.
Have you kind of been filling until I got here, Kathy?
Actually, your timing is very good. I just did the general intro of what's happening tonight, and you were up next, and then you were there. So it's for you to share what you want about the Senate. And if you have time to stay for questions, we'll do those right after you finish, but you tell us your time limits. We do appreciate your being here tonight.
I heard the tail end of what you said, and I got to say, I feel pretty lucky to have you and Alan and other folks on this call as constituents. So that said, let me talk for a little bit. And I have it can be a little late for a 6:30 meeting. So let me, thanks for inviting me. There is so much I feel like I could talk about. I'm in my office at the Capitol. The Senate is in 4-day-a-week sessions, although there's not a Tuesday floor session. I think I've explained this before, but we're constitutionally required to be physically together to advance legislation. That is our floor sessions for first, second, and third readings of bills and voting on bills. And all the committee work, which is by far the majority of the work, is done on, not on Zoom, on Microsoft Teams. And so I come up here for the floor sessions and stay all week, and that's going to continue. I don't think we're going to get the building open this session. And as you probably know, the recent numbers are really concerning on the virus, despite the vaccination spreading as much as it has. We have, in some ways, the worst numbers in the country in terms of increases in hospitalizations and infections. I can't explain that, and it's distressing. But I don't have too much to say about that. I picked out three things to talk about, and then maybe we'll get to questions. One is, you may have heard the rather big news that a deal was struck with House Republicans to get them to stop requiring the full reading of bills for the third reading. I don't, maybe everyone knows all this, but the Constitution requires 3 readings of every bill. And the last one, the third reading, has to be a word for word reading of the entire bill. And the practice is for the minority to agree to suspend the rules so that we don't have to do that. That goes back to a pre-internet, pre-electronic, pre-broadcast time where legislators needed to hear the whole bill before they voted. And it almost never happens, the full reading. But this session, the last 3 sessions, it's happened a little bit. I remember the climate bill, the big climate bill, the Republicans required that it be read in full. And that was 7 or 8 hours or something like that of reading. So this session, for the last month or so, the Republicans have refused to suspend the rules, and every single bill has been read. So I haven't, that's in the House, and poor Pam has been inflicted with that. And they're supposed to be on the floor. So it's just pretty miserable. And bills were, it was clear that the session was going to break down, and the speaker felt it was essential to get them to stop doing that. So an odd deal was cut where 2 concessions were made. One is that a Republican co-chair of the redistricting committee was appointed, so that committee has equal numbers of Democrats and Republicans. And that's unheard of. And theoretically, it's a big deal. And the Democrats have given up now control over drawing the map, except I think that's illusory. I don't think that it matters, because now they have equal numbers and the Republicans can stop a map. But if they do, the mapping goes to Secretary of State Shemia Fagan, who Republicans kind of think of as the most dangerous person in Salem. And they're going to get a better deal if they, are flexible and come to agreement than with the Democrats. It's like the Democrats on that committee can play good cop to Shemia Fagan's bad cop. So I don't think, in essence, too much is given up by adding a Republican to that committee. And by the way, I remain a staunch supporter of making redistricting, giving redistricting to an independent citizens commission. It has never made sense to me that legislators get to do that. So that's one of the supposedly big concessions. And the other one, coming from Republicans who feel shut out of the Ways and Means process, I don't agree that they are, says that, we have, of the several $billion in federal money coming in from the American Recovery Plan Act, the Biden package, $780 million isn't designated yet. And the decision was made to take $240 million of that and divide it up, $4 million per senator and $2 million per representative. That comes to $240 million, for us to individually decide how to spend it. It's got to be one-time money. There are a few sideboards, but not a lot. So we now have 90 tiny Ways and Means committees in the legislature, and before May 10th, I have to decide how to spend $4 million. And I won't dwell here other than to say it's odd, but it's an interesting experiment. So I don't think any of that is terrible. I think it's terrible that we are making concessions in order to get Republicans to do their job. I felt that way during the walkouts when legislation was killed in order to get them back in the building. I think we've set a terrible precedent. And every time we make a concession, we are making their technique of sabotaging the process stronger. Now, there's a solution, and it's for voters to approve a constitutional amendment to change the quorum from 2/3 to 50%, like 46 other states have. But we have to put that on the ballot, and there's some resistance that I don't fully understand to doing that. So that's the most interesting thing probably that's going on right now. I want to talk a little bit about House Bill 2021, which I believe is the most important bill for this particular group. That is the clean energy bill that Pam is centrally involved in. She chairs the House Energy and Environment Committee, and that bill came out of that committee on April 12th on a 4-3 partisan vote, and technically, to go to Ways and Means, technically without recommendation. And I think that's pretty bad news. So, forgive me if I'm repeating some of our earlier conversation about this, but our strategy going in this session was it wasn't time to take yet another run at cap and trade and cap and invest after what happened in 2019 and 2020. There was no indication at all that the results would be any different. People were exhausted and wounded by all that. So we basically said, the thing about the bill we tried to pass those 2 years, first called the Clean Energy Jobs Bill, which many of you know very well, is that it tried to dramatically reduce emissions across the three main sectors of transportation, industrial emissions, and electricity generation. And California is the only state that's done that. Other states have taken one. And the one that seems easiest to achieve is clean electricity generation. And then there are a couple of reasons for that. One is that most utilities are headed that direction anyway. There have been past mandates, the markets are changing, renewables keep coming down in price, coal keeps going up in price. There's lots of reasons for that. So we don't have this big industrial opposition that's part of what killed the climate bill the last 3 years. And we had it in our head that with the big utilities on board, or at least partially on board, some are more than others, that we wouldn't have this huge Republican opposition, that we could get this done. Now, this bill calls for an 80% reduction of greenhouse gas emissions by 2030 in electricity generation, a 90% reduction by 2035, and being 100% clean by 2040, which is easier for us than other states because so much of our portfolio is already hydropower. And a tip of the hat to Alan and Kathy, because this bill talks about reduction of greenhouse gas emissions, not reduction of carbon. So you got to celebrate the small victories where you get them. So apparently our calculation that we wouldn't get a lot of pushback from the Republicans is incorrect, that they would all vote against this bill and are lined up to universally oppose it, even though they've got utility folks saying, don't worry, we can do this, is discouraging. And all I can figure is they can't find a way to get out of the corner of basically claiming that there's nothing seriously amiss with the fossil fuel energy system we have. They staked so much of that on their walkouts and whatnot in the last 2 years, that to say, yeah, we're in on completely clean energy generation is to kind of undermine, everything they've done the last couple of years. And I think that's pretty sad. And I guess I don't have much to say about that. It could be, I think Alan and Kathy have been following the course of this bill more closely than I have, which is not saying much because I've barely followed it, and may have other, more insightful things to say about it. But there is not a rational reason, in my view, for this kind of united opposition from the Republicans. And I hope we can overcome it. I don't think it'll generate walkouts, but who knows anymore. In the Senate, we've got 5 or 6 Republicans now who are pretty staunchly against walkouts. A very divided Republican caucus right now. So I'm not looking towards walkouts, although I think gun legislation that's coming up could cause one. And lastly, I'll talk a little bit about wildfire legislation, which has taken up probably 3/4 of my time the last month. On last week before, we passed out of my Natural Resources and Wildfire Recovery Committee Senate Bill 762, which is a long omnibus wildfire bill, which we passed out of my committee last session before the walkout, and which reflects the governor's wildfire council report from 2019. And I won't, unless you have questions about it, I won't really go into the details. We do have a document that's instead of the 60-page bill, we have, I think, a 4-page summary that I could pass along for you to look at. I think the 2 things that come to mind is there's a little bit of struggle over the section that has to do with fuel reductions and thinning in the woods. And there's a segment of the environmental community who doesn't want to spend any money on that, and a larger sector of the environmental community who says, don't do too much of that. That's not a good investment with our limited dollars. And I agree with that. And most Republicans would like to say, let's not spend a whole bunch of tax dollars on this. Let's do lots of logging and have those proceeds pay for this. And by the way, the wildfire problem is mostly because we haven't logged enough in the last 30 or 40 years. So that's a little bit of the struggle. And the bigger struggle doesn't have to do with the timber wars. It has to do with a group of stakeholders, primarily private property rights groups, realtors, home builders, Farm Bureau, timber industry, who's saying, slow down. You've got a bunch in this bill that is going to mandate new building codes, new zoning, new defensible space requirement in extreme wildfire risk zones. And that's radical. And we need these huge sort of advisory committees with lots of stakeholders to buy off before you do anything, which means after seeing, to me, it means after, kind of 6 years of mega fires since 2010, we're not going to do much on the ground before the 2021 wildfire season, that's for sure. My bill has delays, mapping and other things that have to happen such that not much is going to happen before the 22 season. And if the opponents who say we need to slow down and make sure everybody's on board have their way, we'll see 23 and 24 and 25 go by with no serious work on this problem. And I think people have about had enough of councils and advisory committees and big reports, and would really like to see some work on the ground, hardening communities and smart fuel reduction. And I'm really pushing to hurry this thing. And I'm not sure how that's going to come out given the interest groups at play here. It's fascinating. It's exhausting. It can be frustrating. And if the 2020 wildfire season doesn't make it clear that we have to do this and have to do it fast, I don't have any tricks that's going to do it. I'm really concerned about the wildfire season coming. There's record droughts in the Klamath, and the Rogue Valley isn't very far behind. And we got to get on it. So that's my report for right now. There's plenty more, I'll talk forever about campaign finance reform at the drop of the hat, which we still have to get done this session. But why don't I stop and see what you'd like to talk about?
Great. Thank you, Senator Golden. I'm Lori Kaplan, and Kathy and Alan asked me to moderate any questions that we get.
Hi, Lori.
So you could take a drink of water because we're kind of watching for questions right now. But I'll say for the group, thank you for being here and making this a priority and for all the work that you're doing.
Sure.
I'd love to hear if you have any reasons for optimism.
Long pause.
Sorry.
I'm looking for it. There continues to be some really active youth organizations who are not going to let us get complacent on this issue. I happen to be really pleasantly surprised by the Biden administration on climate. I think it's, I was a little sour at the results of the Democratic primaries. Just was not expecting to see what we're seeing. And, I don't think it's perfect, but that's some cause for optimism. I welcome any of your suggestions about grounds for optimism.
Well, we've got some
Jeff, could I
questions
ask a
coming in.
question? One of the things that I've been exploring lately is this thing called renewable natural gas. And I started off being sort of neutral, not quite figuring out, but the more I've explored it, the more of a crock it seems to be. And I have been hearing that there are a lot of legislators in Salem, probably across the country, who think renewable natural gas is great. I don't know where you stand on that, but can you explain that?
Yeah. So it's natural gas, it's methane from the natural decay of solid waste in dumps and, manure in cattle operations and a few other things. And it sounds like it could be a very good thing, except, and I'm kind of interested in it. I think it's for a variety of reasons, an improvement on frac natural gas. And one of our GHG challenges is methane from mega livestock operations and landfills that isn't captured. So if we could, in fact, reliably capture that for combustion use, I think that would be a pretty good thing. I think the controversy, and I don't think I'm the most knowledgeable person on this call on this, the disagreements are around the technology of methane capture. So, one of the reasons we all opposed the Jordan Cove pipeline so much is because of all the fugitive natural gas, all the leak points along the way. And its supporters said, oh, don't worry, that's getting solved and the technology is improving all the time. I don't know how to assess that claim, but capturing methane is technically a very difficult, without leaks, is a very difficult thing to do. So you've got, these landfills. Dry Creek has invested, I think, a lot of money in methane capture and is supposed to be one of the leaders on this. Obviously, this gets a little harder out on CAFOs, the big cattle farms. So I think on paper, it's something that could be important for the transition to all clean, non-emitting energy. But I have skepticism about the claims that are made that we can eliminate the leaks in supply chains and out at cattle operations. And as you all know, escape methane's a lot more problematic than CO2 as a greenhouse gas. The other thing that skeptics point out is there's this push for more and more renewable natural gas that's often followed by proposals for more infrastructure, more pipelines, more processing plants. And, the argument that, we're figuring out how to produce more RNG, but we need infrastructure to get it, into usable form. So let's build that as the bridge to 100% clean. And then what you've got is even more stranded assets to make it even harder for these big companies to come on board and say, well, we're going to have to stay with gas even longer in order to amortize our investment. And guess what? There's not enough renewable natural gas, so we have to go back to fracking gas. So all of which to say is that I'm not fully reconciled. I'm not as excited as I was at first about renewable natural gas.
Well, Senator Golden, this is Lori again. I'm going to jump in here because I know Alan has been working a lot on this. SOCAN has been working a lot on it and shares your deep skepticism and probably more skeptical than even what you communicated, but it was great to hear you acknowledge some of the challenges there. So I'm sure SOCAN will welcome the opportunity to provide more information on that topic. In the meantime, we do have some other questions. If you have some time, they're rolling in now.
Yeah.
Give us a couple minutes.
Sure.
So does HB 2021 refund the solar energy grant program that ran out of money?
I think the answer to that is yes.
Okay, and Alan, are you going to be talking a little bit about that? No. Okay, I'm going to keep moving then. Is there room in the current environment to allocate substantive new funding to wildfire risk reduction in communities rather than at the landscape? The usual response is to throw more funds to fire suppression. How about funds for wildfire mitigation?
So the wildfire bill 762 that I talked about has as its main categories suppression, forest resiliency, and mostly that means fuel reduction, and fire adapted communities. And that's, everything we've been talking about: defensible space, new building code, harder materials, land use changes, more restrictions on building in extreme fire zones, all of that. And I think the effect of the 2020 fires, and especially the Alameda fire, is to shift emphasis from the other two categories towards community hardening. Some people would say, let's spend all our money in town and outward from that, and none away from town. I think that's a little bit of an extreme position, but it's it's probably it's really complex. I used to think it was simpler than it was, but going out, the governor's wildfire council said that over the next 20 years we should treat 5 million acres in Oregon at a cost of $4 billion or upwards of that. And that's 300,000 acres a year. And for context, we have been treating about 30 to 40,000 acres a year. So the council said after several big wildfire seasons, but before 2020, we need to multiply our efforts on fuel reduction by a factor of 10. And there's no way to pay for that unless you do start heavily logging where we shouldn't be logging, in my view. And B, that's going to take in a lot of ground that's not, I think scientists would agree, are not our wildfire problem, mostly uninterrupted forests. So I have moved, and a lot of people have moved, to the idea that most of our money should go right in and in what's called the fire ignition zone, the home ignition zone, and our lower foothills in Ashland and Wagner Creek and all of that would be examples of all that, and certainly not go very far out. Now there are exceptions. There are watersheds with domestic water supplies, few other strategic places where you do want to clean up, but that's not where we ought to be putting the bulk of our money.
Thank you. Quickly, just an add-on comment around the resources around wildfire mitigation would be a priority for low-income property owners and renters who might not have the resources to be able to do the home hardening and other strategies. So an equity focus to that. Is that something that folks are discussing?
One piece of 762 is a grant fund for helping people who are in the extreme fire zone make their properties safer. And for rebuilding, and there's actually a whole separate bill for wildfire recovery from the 2020 fires. And my committee has responsibility for that too. It does not have political challenges. It has resource challenges. Right now, our list of what we want to do is around $800 million. We can get some FEMA dollars. And one of the smaller pots of that is to pay for people who are rebuilding, who were burned out, to pay the incremental cost of more fire resistant materials and construction methods beyond what they'd have to pay otherwise.
Great. That's great. Thank you. Is there a financially viable means of logging that truly aids fire suppression? It might be a very big topic.
I guess you'd have to define financially viable. I think it's rare that there's going to be a project area where you pay the whole bill with log receipts if you're logging responsibly. Primarily there's exceptions, but the extreme wildfire risk zones tend to be areas that have been logged in the last 20, 30, 40 years. And there's a number of reasons for that. One is that when you lose the crown cover, you've got much more direct sunlight on the ground that generates a lot more bushy material faster, that kind of fuel. So if that's where you're cleaning up, you're not into high value logs. So log receipts can contribute, but I don't think they can. I think it would be rare that they could pay for a project altogether.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Okay,
Yeah, the Ashland Forest Resiliency Project is interesting. They actually they didn't pay for the whole project, but they may have paid for, I'm going to say, a quarter of it, maybe a third of it through log receipts. Some people think it was too heavily logged, but it's pretty close to what we have in mind with this bill.
Mm-hmm. That's great. I'm going to do a hard pivot off the logging and fire question to ask whether are there discussions about including nuclear in the plan for decarbonization of our energy supply, or is nuclear off the table now, or is it in there, the conversations at all?
Again, I'm going to take a little bit of a sidestep because I haven't been doing this bill. It's a perennial conversation, nuclear. And it doesn't, to my knowledge, none of the statutory language either. It may be silent entirely on nuclear, as far as I know. It doesn't incentivize it, and it doesn't preclude it, or I don't know any language like that. And I don't know if Ellen may correct me. And the environmental community is pretty split on this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, great. Well, I want to, we have a couple other comments related to fires, but I think the best thing would be for us to forward those to you, if you don't mind, afterwards, because they're more like suggestions, ideas on the advocacy around that issue. Kathy and Alan, how would you like to proceed?
Okay, well, I think we need to let Jeff go because he does have another meeting, and just express tremendous appreciation, not just to Jeff for being here with us this evening, but also for everything he does for all of us and all life on the planet up in Salem, in terms of environmental protection and particularly, of course, climate. So thanks very much indeed, Jeff, for joining us this evening. We really appreciate your sacrificing your other meeting a bit to join us.
Hearts, and I'm seeing thumbs ups, and I'm seeing clapped hands. So this is really, I guess I want to say that this is, I think I can speak for Pam here and maybe most legislators. This kind of support makes a huge difference because it gets pretty discouraging up here. And you folks kind of remind us why we took this on and why we want to do it in the first place. And I just want to return the admiration for SOCAN and those involved with it, because you folks have been at this persistently for how many years, Alan and Kathy, in the SOCAN form?
We started in 2012, so it's only been 9 years.
Yeah.
We're coming up on 9. Our 10th anniversary is next year.
Well, the focus has been unswerving and just super appreciate it. So we'll talk soon, okay? I want to pitch my newsletter. I try to be informative in that. And if you're not on the list, just Google Senator Jeff Golden, take you quickly to my legislative site, and there on the right's a little email capture box. And hope you'll enjoy that. And invite me back soon, please.
You bet. Thanks very much
Good
indeed.
night.
Good night. Okay, well, first off, let me apologize for the fact that I am not Pam Marsh and will never pretend to be. Pam, anybody who's seen Pam in a town hall meeting will know she is just one impressive legislator who has a tremendous understanding of the bills that are going through, not just the ones that are before her committee, but she has always impressed me with her knowledge of what's going on. I can't even pretend to come close to that. And I will reiterate, we have 2 climate champions serving us in Jefferson City. I'm thinking Missouri again, in Salem. House District 5 is Pam Marsh, and I'm Pam for this evening. And of course, Senate District 3 is Jeff Golden. We do have a clear or apparent cadre of science deniers representing us in House District 3, 4, 6, 55, and Senate Districts 1 and 2. So we're not home free. We could do a lot better for ourselves if we were only to elect a few more Pams and Jeffs up there. We have been monitoring 2021 legislative proposals since before the session. I've spent a lot of time over the last 4 or 5 weeks submitting written and giving oral testimony in support of resolutions. I actually haven't done much against resolutions because the ones that we're opposed to all seem to have died in committee. As Jeff mentioned, the focus in the legislature this year has absolutely not been on that comprehensive bill, but on individual elements of climate action. And the one that Jeff talked about, House Bill 2021, I will refer to very briefly as we go through. That's one of those, just looking at the electricity sector. So let's look at a few critical bills. I'll try and get through this reasonably quickly. House Bill 2021, and this is the one that Jeff mentioned. Pam is a prime author of this, as well as the chair of the Energy and Environment Committee that launched it through its process. What it does is commit to 100% clean electricity by 2040. Now, there is one little wrinkle here because the terms by which it does that are, it states the energy must come from renewable energy resources or non-emitting energy resources. The second part sounds great, but the first part, renewable energy resources, has the unfortunate consequence of including some questionable energy resources that have been defined for one reason or another by the legislature as renewable. Biomass is one of them, and renewable natural gas is another one. So since they've already been defined as renewable energy, it's very difficult to write a bill that suddenly says, no, you can't use those because, so I have concerns about this, but overall, I'm going to say we certainly support the idea that's embedded in House Bill 2021. It does, this is a great point, it does prohibit the future siting of any electrical generation facilities that use fossil fuels, and that includes natural gas. So I'm guessing the facilities that are there now will be grandfathered in, but the bill does prevent any future ones, and it does prevent the current operators of those from upgrading in such a way that they increase their fossil fuel use. It does impose some labor requirements on construction relating to facilities. And this is there was a question about this, I think. It does incorporate a study and an encouragement for small scale electrical generation, such as community solar. It's passed out of the Energy and Environment Committee, and Jeff mentioned that it was passed without recommendation. I absolutely don't know why that is, but it then goes to the House Revenue Committee, and that supposedly is going to be coming up. That hearing is going to be coming up in the next week or so. So if anybody's interested in testifying in support of HB 2021, shoot me an email and I'll make sure you get news about that. House Bill 2488 is an interesting bill. It's actually been modified. It's not as strong as I thought it was when it was written. It was going to require the Conservation and Development Department and the Commission to require the incorporation of reduction of greenhouse gas emissions and social justice in local community actions. Unfortunately, in my judgment, whilst it certainly has maintained the social justice, environmental justice element, it seems to have lost the greenhouse gas emissions reduction component. So I think it's not quite as strong as it was. So it requires the Department of Land Conservation to establish an environmental justice advisory committee. And so now it's all environmental justice, which is a good thing. It would be nice if it included greenhouse gas emissions reductions, however. It has passed out of the Energy and Environment 4-3. You will notice 4-3 coming up frequently. That's a party line vote, and it's been sent to the Joint Ways and Means Committee. House Bill 2062 was proposed actually by Governor Brown. That increases energy and water use efficiency of appliances. That's again passed. It's passed out of the Energy and Environment Committee, passed out of the House, and it's been signed to the Senate and in Energy and Environment Committee. House Bill 2357, that was a bill that I really thought was good. It would have eliminated the Oregon Forest Resources Institute, which is actually paid by taxpayer funds, and it's actually a timber industry entity which operates on behalf of timber beasts, and it would have been nice to get rid of that. It's been amended to defeat the purpose of the bill, but it establishes a sound forestry practices subaccount in the Oregon Department of Forestry budget to keep the organization OFRI going and doing what it's been doing. So that's passed out of the House Revenue Committee, and it's passed out of, I guess it wasn't House Revenue, it was out of the Agriculture and Natural Resources Committee, and it's been forwarded to Revenue. 3375 is a bill that I only recently learned about. What this is doing is promoting offshore wind study by the Oregon Department of Energy. It's what it's seeking to do is promote offshore wind. And we all are familiar with the whole Jordan Cove debacle out in Coos Bay. Turns out from Coos Bay down to Mendocino, California, is what is called the Saudi Arabia of wind. And it's incredibly rich in terms of offshore wind. And if we can get offshore wind projects going off the coast of Southern Oregon, what we will be doing is promoting employment in a sustainable arena. So this bill would establish a task force leading to production of a 3 gigawatt commercial scale floating offshore wind facility. So that's passed out of Energy and Environment 6.0 and is going to the Joint Ways and Means Committee. 2379 is a severance tax bill. Oregon's counties since about the mid-1990s have progressively suffered by dwindling income from forest activities, largely through the severance tax, which the timber industry has gradually persuaded the legislature to remove, so that there's virtually no money coming out of the severance tax because it's dwindled down to almost nothing. And what this bill will do is reimpose a severance tax. It turns out that Oregon doesn't have this, whereas Washington and California charge much more for harvesting timber. And so folks come to Oregon to harvest timber. So this bill, as proposed, would have targeted the severance tax to an emergency wildfire fund. And it would have repealed the harvest tax and funds for certain associated expenditures. There are amendments pending that would in fact adjust the funds generated by this severance tax, so more of them go to the counties to replace the monies lost by the dwindling severance tax over the years. It passed out of Agriculture and Natural Resources 6-4 and is going to Revenue. There was a whole series of electric vehicle bills that were proposed promoting electricity. 2180 was an electricity charging stations bill, and that was going to amend building codes such that new apartment buildings, for example, were required to install some charging stations in the parking lot. It passed the Energy Environment Committee, passed the House 4213, and has been forwarded to the Senate Environment and Energy and Environment Committee. Our local Republicans voted no on that bill. 2290, statewide fast charging requires statewide plan developed to install EV chargers across the state, has passed out of transportation, passed the House, and has been forwarded to the Senate Transportation Committee. Senate Bill 314 allows utilities to recover some of the charges that they spend for installation for undertaking electrification to the consumers. This bill, unfortunately, was going to focus on electrification, but it's been undermined by the gas industry, persuading senators and representatives to allow for to allow industries, the gas industry, to promote renewable natural gas, which is really unfortunate. It passed out of the Senate Energy and Environment Committee, passed the Senate, and has gone to the House Energy and Environment Committee. There was a proposal to allow rebates for farmers to buy electrical powered tractors, which seemed to me a tremendously good idea, because one of the problems you'll realize we always have is persuading folks in rural Oregon that we are working for them. This and other bills are simply not moving, unfortunately. If you want more information on legislative issues, please go to the legislative session webpage. I'm going to talk about the Oregon Climate Action Committee program in just a moment. If you want more information about bills to support, please shoot me an email. alan@socan.eco is relatively easy. Okay, so let's move. We'll see if we can have a few questions at the end, but let's move on to the Oregon Climate Action Plan, which is the outcome of the governor's executive order. And I'll do a quick bit of history for you, because I tend to assume people know more than they do. And so we'll just do a quick potted history. The reason for the governor's executive order was because House Bill 2020 and Senate Bill 1530, respectively 2019 and 2020, failed as a result of Republicans walking out of the chambers. And as a consequence, the governor in 2020 signed Executive Order 2004. So what this did was charge 16 of the 100+ state agencies, board, and commissions who have relevant authority to contribute within their statutory authority to achieving greenhouse gas emissions across the state. The goal, at least 45% below 1990 emissions levels by 2035 and at least 80% below 1990 by 2050. It's not what we know we need, which is net zero by 2050, but this would have put the state on a steep downward trajectory. I will, and it's still in effect. And I will make a note that the amount we need to get to is 11.6 million metric tons of emissions by 2050. And I'll come back to that number in a few moments. In addition, this executive order promotes the sequestration of carbon from the atmosphere by regenerative agriculture and sustainable forestry management. It also demands that as this program is developed, equity and social justice issues are addressed. And it does this all in a cost-effective manner. The program is supposed to take effect on January the 1st of 2022. So the agencies had over a year and a half to develop the program. The response of the climate activist movement, which is led by Renew Oregon, the Oregon Environmental Council Climate Solutions, OLCV, and of which we are a very active part, was to establish 6 teams, they call tables, of climate activists to monitor agency action. Excuse me. And these are the 6 teams or tables, and I've been very active in Cap and Reduce and the Natural Working Lands, and other SOCAN folks have been involved with other of these teams. I'm going to start with the Cap and Reduce program, which is largely a function of the Department of Environmental Quality. In March, the coalition leaders put together an interim report, sort of the annual report on what was happening. And I'm largely going to refer to that as I talk through the next few minutes. So we're going to look at what's going well and what needs improvement. The stationary sources, utilities, and fuel suppliers are the target of the Cap and Reduce program. So these are the things that are going well. The major point is that DEQ, I thought, started really well with a very open public process in which they had a series of 6 technical workshops, town halls, and so forth, in which they discussed what they were doing. They are supporting environmental justice participation in the process by funding them, and they established a rulemaking advisory committee, or RAC, which is composed of 30 folks who meet once a month and offer advice to DEQ on what they're doing. There are things that need improvement. One of them is that the RAC was heavily dominated by oil and gas interests. It had no science representatives on it, and it's proposing very weak standards. Well, the DEQ is proposing very weak standards. The RAC doesn't have much but an advisory role, and DEQ is not following best available science, as we're seeing time and again. In particular, DEQ is proposing to exempt electricity. And what you might have heard is a proposal that they would exempt the 6 largest emitters of greenhouse gases in the state, being fossil gas or natural gas electricity generators. That's because they exempted electricity. If we look at 2019 emissions, that amounts to 10.8 million metric tons of emissions. DEQ is also proposing that the threshold for inclusion of fossil fuel suppliers is 300,000 metric tons. And that's going to exempt another 3.4 million metric tons of emissions. And you can see right away that blows through that 11.6 million metric tons target, because that alone amounts to 14.2 million metric tons. And they're also supporting renewable natural gas, which is, for me, becoming an ever increasing problem. Natural and working lands. Oregon Global Warming Commission has developed a robust plan for stakeholder engagement. They've sent out a couple of surveys, a stakeholder survey and a follow-up questionnaire. Those are going well. What they need to do is to improve. The Oregon Department of Forestry has not adequately developed any kind of a climate and equity response. And the Board of Forestry, which is the controlling agency over ODF, is not considering climate in decisions it's making. So that area needs a lot of improvement. In terms of health, the Oregon Health Authority has really been doing some great work. Even in the middle of the COVID crisis, they developed a very strong climate and health report, which was issued last November. And the Occupational Safety and Health Administration of Oregon has initiated rulemaking to promote worker protection standards, which are very good. In terms of improvement, their initial rack was a little overstocked with industry, and we kind of see this happening again and again. Transportation, things that are going well. The Department of Transportation established a climate office, and a director of the climate office who was a climate expert. The Department of Land Conservation and Development established a climate-friendly and equitable communities rulemaking advisory committee. And DEQ is accelerating electrification, which is all to the good. What they need to improve is a sense of urgency. ODOT and the Oregon Transportation Committee seem not to have quite the sense of urgency, and that's a problem that we're seeing across the board in terms of agencies. The Climate Office had made suggestions on funding regarding greenhouse gas emissions, but they were largely ignored. The Transportation Commission failed to incorporate sufficient recommendations in their statewide transportation improvement plan for 2024-2027. They operate that far ahead. Clean energy. The major thing that's going well is the Department of Energy has updated its Energy Facility Siting Council standards for carbon emissions. But what they need to improve is that the Public Utilities Commission has not proposed action to achieve the executive order targets, and seems to be pushing back again the timelines for implementation of OCAP goals. And they did not include local renewable generation to improve wildfire responses. Clean buildings. The Department of Energy is pursuing appliance standards, and the Building Codes Division has acknowledged minimum building energy efficiency goals for 2030 of 60% reduction in emissions, and they're updating the REACH codes to be commensurate with the national version. The Building Codes Division did fail to update their delayed 2020 building codes to incorporate anything about the executive order, and they could have included additional appliances in their updates. Big summary on what's happening on the Climate Action Plan. While some agencies seem to have taken the executive order quite seriously, others seem to be laggards and seem to be resistors. While the executive order clearly stated at least 45% below 1990 levels by 2035 and at least 80% below by 2050, they allowed flexibility amongst agencies to go further than the 80%. So not one agency has seemed to be willing to even target the executive order goal, much less go beyond that in the direction of achieving net zero. So my initial excitement at the executive order, I will confess, has dwindled somewhat over the months as the agencies have been working. The major problem seems to be exemptions proposed by the DEQ that I have itemized a while back. And I'm just having difficulty seeing how, with what DEQ seems to be proposing, we're going to get close to what the executive order has established as goals. There seems to be considerable deference being paid, particularly within DEQ, to that House Bill 2021 that I mentioned a moment ago and Jeff mentioned. So they seem to be expecting, DEQ seems to be expecting the legislature to come to the rescue with this 100% clean electricity bill. Because if that happens, it takes them off the hook for having exempted the electricity sector in their developing program. Unfortunately, the reality is, as we know, we are exactly where we are because the legislature has failed to do the kind of thing that DEQ is now hoping that they will do. So, quick hint on where to go for more information on OCAP. I'm trying to keep this page up to date, socan.eco/OCAP. And if you're having difficulty, you want to learn how you can get involved, shoot me an email and I'll do the best I can to help you. Okay, so that's it for me. And are you going to?
Questions?
Okay, so if you got any questions, Laurie, we can deal with them until Kathy rolls my chair away.
We don't have any right now, Alan. So maybe you want to go ahead, Kathy. Or we can, however you want to handle it. We don't have any at this time.
All right, we'll go ahead and do this last bit. And if there are questions that appear, we can stay around and take care of those. My task is to spend just a few minutes talking about different events that are happening, SOCAN, and then some of these are from other people. Everything I say, if you miss details, you can go to socan.eco/events and get the details there. So what we've done is we've developed 5 program areas, and then we have projects within each of those program areas. The areas include education, government, natural resources, transportation, and community engagement. The education program, one of the big activities is the Master Climate Protector. I see quite a few people here tonight that were part of one of the Master Climate Protectors. We just finished the 2021 Master Climate Protector, and so are now beginning plans for the next one, which will start in February 2022. Actually have one person recently signed up for that. So if you're interested and have questions, let us know. The government program has several projects. The federal and state project is involved in a lot of the things Alan has talked about tonight. Their next meeting is Monday, May 10th. The county and city project is a fairly new project, and watch the calendar or sign up for the monthly broadcast to get information about that next meeting. Also within the government program is the Ashland Climate Action Project. So if you live in Ashland and you want to work with people on climate issues in Ashland, send Lori an email, lori@socan.eco, and she'll keep you updated on what's happening with that project. Under natural resources, the Forest and Fire Project has a meeting on Wednesday, May 19th. And on all of these, if you go to the calendar, you'll get the link to the meeting, the Zoom link. We have under the community engagement program, the Coastal SOCAN group, and they have a monthly meeting. This month is Wednesday, or next month is May 19th. And they're going to be talking about EV charging stations and things that are happening through their electric cooperative. Sustaining Climate Activists has decided to take a break for May and June. So that group will be back meeting again in July, and that's open to anybody who's interested in working through issues with fatigue, distress, outrage, grief, for things that you're doing relating to climate change. We have a meeting once a month. So next month's meeting will be on May 25th, always the last Tuesday of the month. And the topic is going to be the water smart generation. Love your water, use it wisely. And Julie Smitherman, who's now is the Water Resources Coordinator in Medford, is going to do that presentation. We have also in the community engagement group a project called Businesses Taking Action. The people who have taken the time to complete the form on what they're doing with environmental and social justice are listed here. We encourage you to support them. Go to the website and see what they've written that they're doing. We acknowledge that nobody's perfect. We're all learning. And so everybody needs to be encouraged to do more. The Leadership Circle meets every 2 months, and anybody is invited to join us. The next meeting is Wednesday, May 12th. We talk about the different projects and how we can support each other as we're taking action. Other projects are listed here. These do not have current meetings, but there are things happening. If you're interested in any of these, you can contact me or Alan, or if you catch the name of the person in charge, just send them an email. These are a few things that are going on with other groups. So Rethinking Waste, this is sponsored by the City of Ashland, the Climate and Energy Programs, and they're having a presentation on Thursday, April 29th. Now they have these on their Facebook, but if you don't know how to get to that, if you just go to SOCAN's Facebook page, which is SO Climate, there'll be a link there. And so you can find more information about all of these. Also from the City of Ashland, purchasing an electric vehicle on Thursday, May 20th is going to be the topic of that presentation. And our family farms, many of you may know them from the ban against GMOs. May 20th is going to be an anniversary both for when the voters passed the measure establishing Jackson County GMO ban ordinance, and then the 2015 successful defense of the ordinance in federal court. So they're having a celebration and people are invited to join them. ROCPAC is Rural Oregon Climate Political Action Committee, having a presence in the legislature, supporting actions for rural Oregonians on climate action. So now it's time to challenge you to take some action. You know, it's nice to learn things, but without moving forward and doing something, it doesn't do us a lot of good. What we try to do is create on our socan.eco/action page. So if you go to that page for this month's meeting, there are 2 links and they're in a larger font, so it should be easy to find. Oregon's 2021 legislative session, so information on those bills that Alan was talking about, where they are, that's all tracked. And so you can go to that link to find that information. And then Oregon's Climate Action Plan, which is through the governor's executive order, updates about that are on this other page with actions that you can take as well. So thanks very much to Senator Golden for being here, taking time out of his schedule. If you missed the information, Representative Marsh is on the floor. They're trying to catch up because of another COVID pause they had to take. So she wasn't able to be here, but the work that both of them are doing is just incredible. And to Alan for filling in when Pam couldn't make it, and also for all the action in keeping involved in Southern Oregon, giving us a voice as we work on the governor's executive orders. Thanks to Lori for helping. It's always important to have somebody else there doing things. And thanks to all of you for joining us. It's a good group tonight, and we really appreciate you taking the time and being here as we try to take more action. Activities in our legislature are really important. It's one way of moving forward in a collective manner. And so anything you can do to stay informed and be active are really going to be helpful. Like Jeff said, they appreciate the voice that we share so that then they are able to say, I'm representing my constituents. They care about these issues. So communicating with them, even though we think they're doing exactly what we want them to, is really important. And finally, I'll send an email right after we finish with a survey. It really helps us to know how things go for you as we're doing these presentations. SOCAN's website is socan.eco. And if you have any questions, info@socan.eco will get them to us. And if you're able to help financially, we always appreciate that kind of support. So I would like to thank you again for being with us this evening.